Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC Paris Cirly Gane versus Serghei Spivak, we saw a lot of terrible performances, and I am going to give my opinion on who needs to be cut from the UFC after their performance at UFC Paris. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, then I'm going to get into my actual list, saving for who I want most cut for last on the list. And if you looked over the UFC Paris card, you probably saw a lot of fighters making their debuts who lost their UFC debut, and you saw a lot of fighters who, if they lost on the card, they're only on a one-fight losing streak. And you're probably thinking, Joey, how do you find this many fighters to cut? Believe me, the cuts on this list 100% belong on this list. And there is about 3 cuts on this list that I think you're not going to expect at all. So let's start off with the honorable mentions. And the first honorable mention is Jocelyn Edwards. Jocelyn Edwards lost to Nora Cornell. A lot of people thought Jocelyn Edwards won this fight. It was just a horrible performance. And Jocelyn Edwards lost this fight on the scorecards. And then her previous 2 fights were split decision wins where she looked atrocious. And I understand the bantamweight division isn't full of talent, and maybe the UFC hopes that she improves her skills. But the fact that you're taking someone down, and I am confused whether or not you still know you're in a fight or you think you're laying in bed because you're not doing any damage, you're not throwing any strikes. You know, I think you probably deserve to be cut from the UFC, but at the same time, this is only her first loss in her last few fights. She won her last few fights, even though they were narrowly via split decision, so I figured I'd put her on an honorable mention, but the performance was horrific. If this was any other division that had a lot of talent, if this was women's flyweight, women's strawweight, or basically any of the men's divisions, I would be screaming from the rooftop. She might have even made number 1. She was taking Cornell down and literally laying on her doing nothing. And I know a lot of people say, oh, Edwards got robbed. When you lay on somebody throwing no strikes and landing no damage, you deserve to lose. And I actually scored at 29-28 for Cornell. I had the first 2 rounds for her. So Jocelyn Edwards, horrible performance. She's walking on thin ice, okay? After this performance, she's walking on thin ice. Moving on to my next honorable mention, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one because this fighter actually won, and that is William Gomez. William Gomez defeated Yanis Gamori via 3rd round TKO, via a cup shot that should have been a pause in action, and then the fight should have resumed. Now, fair play enough, William Gomez was already winning this fight. He was going to win on the scorecards. It was a relatively boring fight overall, but there was something he said in his post-fight interview that really rubbed me the wrong way. He acted like it was a clean stoppage. He acted like it was a clean TKO, and he says, I know where I target my strikes. And he had to have known. I mean, his foot clearly grazed the cup. He was watching it on the replay and still claiming that was a clean shot. And just the fact that he was kind of feeling himself, oh yeah, I got a 3rd round TKO. Like, the only thing that would have really, honestly would have put him number 1 on the list, if he would have called for a $50K bonus afterwards, because the fight was relatively boring. He didn't throw any punches really. He was just leg kick battle the entire fight. Then he gets somehow bailed out, not necessarily bailed out because he was going to win anyway, but he basically gets bailed out of a horrible decision victory by a cup shot that gets called a TKO, and then he acts like, it was very familiar. Obviously, this was a low-level fight. Obviously, this was a prelim fight, or it wasn't even a prelim fight. It was a main card fight, but this wasn't a fight a lot of people were paying close attention to. But imagine if this was like a number 1 contender fight. Imagine if this was Sean O'Malley, Piotr Yan. Imagine if this was Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira. And imagine had the roles been reversed. Imagine Gamori was winning, and somehow Gomez wins due to TKO via cup shot, and then he really acts and claims victory afterwards. It really rubbed me the wrong way. I put him on an honorable mention because he still did have an okay performance. He was going to win on the scorecards, but I don't care that it doesn't change the outcome. I don't care about that. It's just that stuff like this should not be happening. We have HD, you can look at the replay, and Gomez acting like, yeah, I know how to target my shots. Just absolutely rubbed me the wrong way, and that's why he's an honorable mention. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is Serghei Spivak. And I know, he fought Cirly Gane. He gets TKO'd by Cirly Gane in the 2nd round, and I know Gane is very, very good. But the fact that Spivak's striking look like he's been training with Juliana Pena and Juliana Miller, who have two of the worst striking abilities in all the UFC. And the fact that he just had nothing to offer. And I know the heavyweight division is so shallow. That's why he's an honorable mention. And I know he won his last few fights. But, man, this was hard to watch. This was very hard to watch. He was getting beaten up, and he wasn't even throwing back. So at that point, what's the point of even being in there? Because if you're blocking and not throwing, and at least you're not getting beat up, or you're at least taking minimal damage, I understand. But you're literally getting smashed. You're getting punched in the face. You're getting ripped to the body. You're not blocking, you're probably blocking 20% of it. Why not at least throw back? He must have threw, at one point, I remember the stats pulled up in the second round. I don't even believe in the stats, but this one seemed rather accurate, and this just further kind of, cements what I'm saying in general. It was like 26 strikes from Cirly Gane to 1 from Spivak. And it was something along those lines, regardless of the stats. I don't necessarily believe in them. Spivak was throwing nothing. So he was literally going out there. I say Stipe in his last fight against Francis Ngannou, he impersonated a lawn chair. Spivak was literally a heavy bag. He was literally a heavy bag in this fight. And the way he was like shelling up against the fence, and then he was like squatting down, and he looked like an NPC. And it was just a horrible performance. The striking was horrible. He looked just so unathletic in this fight. And the fact that that's the top of the heavyweight division, I mean, the winner of this fight is in a good position to fight for a heavyweight title in the very near future. I just think it was an embarrassing performance from Serghei Spivak. But I do understand the heavyweight division isn't the greatest. He does have good grappling. He just couldn't get Gane down, couldn't close the distance because Gane is very athletic. So I want to give him a little bit of a pass, but I still have to call out that atrocious striking, that horrible performance. Moving on to my actual list, starting off with my first cut, and that is Zarah Fairn. Zarah Fairn lost to Jacqueline Calvacant in the first fight of the night. And I know people are probably thinking, how is she the first cut? How is she not last on the list? Zarah Fairn is 6-6 overall. She is 6-6 with her pro MMA record, okay? This is absolute insanity. She's on a 4-fight losing streak. She has not won a fight since December of 2017. Let me repeat that. December of 2017. This December will be 6 years since she's won a fight. And she goes out there against Jacqueline Calvacant, making her UFC debut. And Zarah Fairn doesn't really throw much. She doesn't try to implement grappling at all. She just goes out there and eats some leg kicks, eats some combinations, and just basically coast to a decision lost against Calvacant. She had nothing to offer, and on top of that, and I'm not 100% sure of this, so I can't criticize her completely. We never really got clear answers. If somebody knows, let me know down in the comments. This fight was supposed to be at 135. It got moved to 140. I said in the lead up to this fight, Zarah Fairn hadn't made 135 pounds since 2017, and she only made 135 pounds twice in her entire career. She is massive. She is a featherweight, but the UFC is getting rid of that division, or has gotten rid of that division, which really never existed to begin with. And I just don't think she can even make 135 pounds. She had a size advantage against Jacqueline Calvacant, and she's just content sitting there at range and getting picked apart. Doesn't even get super aggressive. Doesn't look to change the game plan. Doesn't look for a takedown. She's 6-6 overall. She's at 500 for her pro MMA career. And the fact that she's come to work, think about this. I know I'm exaggerating a bit because it won't be 6 years till December, but just listen, hear me out for a second. She has come to work for 6 straight years and has not achieved what she wants to achieve. She has not performed her job. That is craziness. It's time for her to find a new career. I don't take joy in this at all. I know a lot of people say, how can you be so negative? I want her to go. I want the UFC to pay her to fight bums and get some wins for the rest of her days. She's 39 years old. She's 6-6. She has not won a fight in damn near 6 years. She needs to be cut from the roster. Absolute embarrassing performance at UFC Paris. And, it just sucks because this was in her hometown too. So she didn't even have the motivation to go out there and really try to put on a performance, to go out there and look to clip Calvacant. It's not like Calvacant has some crazy power and Zarah Fairn was just unwilling to engage. It was an embarrassing performance. She showed a little bit of aggression towards the end of the third round, but too little too late. She just looks horrible. The grappling isn't there. The striking isn't there. The age is, she's getting up there almost to her 40s. She's 6-6. It's time for her to go to another career path. She needs to be cut from the organization. Moving on to my next cut from UFC Paris. And the UFC actually can't make this cut. I guess they could. They could implement some rules that would make this cut. But my next cut is Pat Barry, who is Rose Namajunas' coach, cornerman, and husband or fiance. I'm not even sure if they got married. I think they did get married. But nonetheless, Pat Barry is ruining Rose Namajunas' career. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's giving bad advice. And where was Trevor Whitman? Where was Trevor Whitman? Rose Namajunas was the champion at strawweight under Trevor Whitman. In the last fight she had at strawweight against Carla Esparza, and I almost put Rose on this list just for her previous performance against Carla Esparza at UFC 274, one of the worst fights I've ever seen. But I really do believe that Rose's decline, and I only have anecdotal evidence of this, but I do believe it's due to Pat Barry. He's giving horrible corner advice. I made a whole video at UFC 274, and you can go back and watch that video, search it on my channel about Pat Barry. Rose Namajunas was doing nothing at UFC 274, and Pat was in her corner saying, good job. He's pushing Trevor Whitman aside and saying, damn good job, Rose. You got this. You're the best. You know, you're not throwing anything. You're not grappling. You're not winning the fight. Who knows what the judges are scoring it, but you're doing a hell of a job. And now he advises her, you have 2 wins over the current champ, 1 by knockout. You have 2 wins over the current champ. I believe Pat Barry is the one that gave her the advice to move up to flyweight. She then loses at flyweight in a relatively boring performance. Let's be honest. I didn't think it was a relatively inspiring performance from either girl, Manon Fior, who Rose Namajunas lost to. But he wasn't even giving her good advice. Like, I listened to some of the corner advice, and he was like, the kicks are landing, but you don't need to throw them. Don't throw them. Like, he's telling her not to throw the leg kicks that are actually landing. And you know, she has a broken finger. He just says, oh, you know, and that one I can't really criticize. Well, what is he going to do about it? I don't know. I don't know if he could maybe snap it back into place. I don't know. So I can't criticize him too much for that. But the corner advice is atrocious. The fact that he basically caused her to lose her strawweight title, the fact that Trevor Whitman isn't there, the silence is deafening. Trevor Whitman is an amazing MMA coach, and instead you now have Pat Barry in your corner basically as your head coach. It really is almost like if you had someone, let's say your wife was a brain surgeon. You wouldn't want your wife to perform brain surgery on you, if that makes sense. You don't want your husband at least being your main head coach and cornerman, because they're going to let their biases get in their way of their coaching. And on top of that, Pat Barry doesn't seem very smart to begin with. So we need to cut Pat Barry out of Rose Namajunas' life. Bare minimum, we need to cut Pat Barry out of Rose Namajunas' cornering life when she's fighting in the UFC. Otherwise, Rose Namajunas' career is headed off a cliff. I really do believe it is headed off a cliff. The fact that Trevor Whitman isn't there, the fact that Pat Barry was kind of pushing Trevor Whitman out of the way in her last fight, in her title fight, where she lost to Carla Esparza in an uneventful fight, one of the worst fights in UFC history. I think Pat Barry needs to get out of the corner of Rose Namajunas. Moving up on my list to my next cut, and that is UFC commentator Michael Bisping. Ooh, this one actually really irritated. Michael Bisping is one of the worst commentators in all of the UFC. He is the worst commentator, I will say. He is the worst commentator in the UFC. This guy is so unbelievably biased towards UK fighters. Horrific. I mean, the whole Ange Losa fight versus Reese McKee. Ange Losa is literally 10-8ing Reese McKee, and Bisping's like, oh, what a chin. He's talking for 45 seconds about the chin of Reese McKee. This dude is so incredibly biased. He was biased towards all the UK fighters for the entire card, basically. You know, he clearly picks favorites. I mean, think about some of the headlines he's made recently about Tom Aspinall and John Jones. Like, the guy is inherently biased. And even if he wasn't biased, he doesn't pay attention to the action. Half the time he's talking over it, making corny jokes while there's actual action going on in the cage. He's missing big shots. He's writing a narrative for some fights that is literally a fantasy world. And then to top it all off for UFC Paris, the groin shot, going back to the groin shot. We talked about it earlier. with William Gomez, okay? We talked about it earlier. Michael Bisping was adamant on commentary that, oh, that was a clean shot that landed in the belt line. He couldn't wait to do the post-fight because, like, yeah, I thought that was a clean shot too. You know, and he's setting the narrative among uneducated fight fans who are just listening to the broadcast for their information. And they're like, oh, well, Bisping, he's a former fighter. He's a commentator. He knows what he's talking about. That was legal. And then, I mean, you can add this in, and this necessarily didn't happen yesterday a whole lot, but you have Bisping scoring fights live on the broadcast and doing a horrific job of it because he doesn't understand the scoring criteria. The guy is the worst commentator in the UFC. We need to get rid of Michael Bisping. He's got plenty of money. He runs a YouTube channel that's very successful. I'm sure the UFC was paying him to do other things. He can even be on the analyst desk. Please, UFC, please, MMA gods, don't make me listen to him on another UFC fight night. He is horrible. He is horrible. Half the time he's talking about side things and weird stuff with Paul Felder while there's actual action going on. And the guy is just insufferable. I can't stand Michael Bisping. I want him off commentary immediately. He needs to be cut by the UFC. He needs to be sent somewhere else to do another job because the commentary is not up to par. I know he has one eye. And honestly, that's probably not good for watching fights cage side and giving your opinion on them and giving your commentary on them to a large fan base. He has literally one eye. And apparently he has no nuts either because, you know, the fact that he was saying basically Yanis Gamori was faking a nut shot and got TKO'd because of it, and Michael Bisping is acting like it's clean. Man, I can't stand Michael Bisping. Get him off commentary immediately. UFC, cut him, please. Moving on to my last cut, and you guys are going to be like, who the hell is this? We need to cut. The UFC needs to cut immediately. We need to cut Loic Pora. Who's Loic Pora, you might ask? Well, let me remind you, Loic Pora is the UFC referee that reffed William Gomez versus Yanis Gamori, who stopped the fight via third round TKO. This guy's an idiot. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. And on top of that, he can't admit fault, okay? There are big screens all around the arena, okay? And after he called this fight off, and I talked about it, I did a full post-fight for UFC Paris. If you want to check that out, I'll link it down in the description. But the shot, maybe he didn't see it, okay? And you have Yanis Gamori immediately grab his cup, immediately start walking off, and Loic Pora, the referee, goes, fight, fight. And Yanis Gamori has his back completely turned to him. And he says, fight a couple more times. He kind of touches him on the arm, and then he waves it off. I'm not even sure, because some people were saying, even if it was a low blow, he ignored the referee's instructions to continue fighting, okay? People were saying, even if it was a low blow, the referee instructed him to continue to fight. I'm not even sure Yanis Gamori understood him. I'm not sure Yanis Gamori heard him to begin with, and I'm not even sure I'm not even sure if he speaks English. Now, he may very well, but either way, there's a loud crowd. UFC Paris, shout out to UFC Paris crowd. The crowd was incredible. He may have not even be able to hear him. He turns his back, the ref just waves it off. Then Yanis Gamori's like telling him, no, I got hit in the cup. He's pointing up at the big screen. The ref's looking up at the big screen saying, no, 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 no. It clearly grazed the cup. It grazed the cup on the way up. It grazed the cup on the way down. Say what you will about where the main impact was. You can say the main impact was on the belt line. But these things are not mutually exclusive. It can hit both. I'm so tired of hearing it from Bisping and Rogan. Oh, it landed in the belt line. Did it touch the cup, yes or no? That's what I need to know. Did it touch the cup? If it did, then it is a cup shot. It doesn't matter if it lands in the belt line after it hits the cup. Even a small impact causes severe pain. Unless you're Michael Bisping and you don't have any nuts, which apparently he doesn't, okay? It's infuriating that now we have a third round TKO for William Gomez that he shouldn't have had. I don't care that he was winning the fight. Imagine that he wasn't. Imagine Gomez was losing the fight. Imagine Yanis Gamori was clearly winning. And imagine something like this happens, okay? And we're just going to excuse it away. Michael Bisping's going to excuse it away. The UFC's going to excuse it away. If they had any integrity, this needs to be overturned. I don't want to say to a no contest, but they need to say, okay, this is now a technical decision. This needs to be a technical decision. And I understand people are going to say, what does it matter? Gamori lost, he lost. He would have lost on the scorecards. No, I think it is horseshit that this is called a TKO when it shouldn't have been. I think it's horseshit that a ref makes an egregious error like this and it's not rectified. I don't care if he would have lost anyway. A nut shot is a nut shot. It needs to be called a nut shot. They need to admit fault. Now, the UFC, they have some say in what commission they use, you know, especially when they're going overseas, and they have some say in what referees that they want from the commission. You know, the UFC, in a weird way, they basically exiled Steve Mazzagatti. That's why you never see him reffing anymore. You only see him, you know, he's the timekeeper or the clapper. Because guess what? Steve Mazzagatti made so many egregious errors. The UFC says, if you continue to use them, we don't want to come here anymore. So they lobbied the complaint. The UFC has the power to deal with some of these reffing mistakes. And this needs to be dealt with. Loic Pura, he looks about 65. He looks about 75 years old. He should never ref a fight again. If that's how he's going to stop a fight, I'd hate to see a knockout loss. Oh my, imagine a late stoppage from that guy. Imagine what kind of early stoppages he could have. Imagine if this was a title fight. Imagine if this was a title fight. Imagine Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. You know, imagine the first fight. Let's rewind to the 4th round of Adesanya versus Pereira 1 in MMA, where Adesanya's clearly winning. He's up on the scorecards, and Pereira needs to finish in the 5th round, okay? Imagine instead of Pereira going out there and standing TKO'd him, imagine he lands a kick to the groin of Adesanya. Adesanya then turns his back, and the ref waves it off as a TKO. Not only is that unsatisfying, it's just plain outright wrong. And this was an egregious mistake by the referee. And because this mistake was so horrible and it was not rectified, he had the opportunity. He looked up on the screen. He could have said, you know what? Let's just go to the scorecards. If we don't have the ability to restart the fight based on the rules, let's go to the scorecard. And even imagine, this is the last thought I'll leave you with on this fight because I'm going too long. But imagine had that just cleanly landed on the belt line. Imagine that was a TKO stoppage. That was a horrible stoppage. That was a horrible stoppage because Yanis Gamori was still kind of, you know, I guess defending himself. It's not like Gomez was swarming him at all. So it's one shot to the body and all of a sudden you're going to wave it off TKO. So even if it was a clean shot, it was a horrible stoppage. I understand he turned his back and all, but let him fight it out. Chelsea Chandler was given that ability. You know, she turned her back and sprinted like Forrest Gump. She was still given the ability to fight it out. This referee needs to never ref a fight again. Bare minimum, he needs to ref low-level fights. But I don't even want that because he's going to get someone killed. He looks like he's 65, 75 years old. He probably doesn't have the best eyesight. He obviously doesn't understand the rules of MMA. He obviously can't make decisions on a split second, and he can't rectify them when he realizes there's a mistake. He can't even admit fault. I want him out of there. I want Loic Pura gone. I want him gone. He should never ref an important fight again, and he really should never ref any fight again. He can be the 10-second clapper guy. I don't want him to lose his job. Let him be the 10-second clapper guy, but don't ever put him in there in the cage ever again. Now, as far as on this list, who I believe will actually be cut, I don't think Jocelyn Edwards will be cut because the UFC kind of needs fighters for 135. The talent pool is horrible there. William Gomez will not be cut because he had a win. These are the honorable mentions. Serghei Spivak, I don't believe he'll be cut, even though that performance was horrible. The way he was striking in that fight is how I imagine Stephen Wonderboy Thompson strikes in his nightmares when he's imagining he's fighting a grappler. That's how Serghei Spivak struck in that main event against Cirly Gane. It was horrible. The striking was horrible. Zara Farron, 100% getting cut. Pat Barry, the UFC isn't going to ban him from cornering Rose Namajunas. Michael Bisping, I don't think the UFC is going to do anything about it. The ref, Loic Pura, I think they might do something about that. They've done stuff about horrible refs in the past. But bare minimum, I'm telling you right now, Yanis Gamori needs to file an appeal because that was 100% a bad decision by the ref, and there needs to be some type of explanation of that decision. So that's my cuts video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Is there anyone I missed? Am I, being a bit crazy on some of these cuts? Let me know. I'm genuinely curious. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.